All right. Well, I think we're live. Julio, do you want to check up on the side there on the phone? Just to make sure that we're live on the account. We're up and rocking. So, hey, everybody,
Absolutely.
if you're out there, welcome to the Set to Close kind of bi-weekly conversation. Today, we're going to talk about implementing automation in your sales process to increase productivity. It's a mouthful, but basically, how do you get people to do more every day that produces higher results, right? Like that's the ultimate goal. If I can turn one salesperson and increase their productivity by 30%, I get 30% more results if they're functioning at a high level and I have everything in line. So that's what we're going to be discussing today and going down that kind of rabbit hole. And I'd encourage you guys, if you're watching this right now, you're just tuning in, like it, comment, throw something up for us that you're interested in discussing, and we'll bring up those topics. Because for us, sales automation and productivity is our life. Like that's our main lifeblood of what we do at Set to Close, is trying to increase these things. And what we want to do is share with you, how do we do that? And where do we start? And what kind of questions should you be asking to your team as we go about that? And so when you start on this journey, we want you to keep in mind that there's a few key things that you need to look at. Currently, you need to have good data and understand where your baseline is, because you can't manage what you haven't measured. So if you don't have a current measurement of your data, we don't expect that we can improve it. And you shouldn't either. So one of the first things that you have to do is make sure you're in a good CRM and that you are actually tracking things. You know where things go. You understand your workflows. You understand how data moves, because imperfect data gives you imperfect results. And so part of the challenge that we face is when we talk to clients, they're like, improve us. And we're like, what's your baseline? And they're like, we don't know. And you would be surprised. This is 90% of the people that we find in market, not even 80-20. 90% of the people in the market don't have control of their data, or they think they have control of their data. And when we drill down to layer one, they might have, which is how many calls are you making? How many meetings are coming from that? But then you say, well, okay, what's your no-show rate? What's your close rate? What are these things? When you start digging in, they don't have it. So today we're going to explore a lot of like, how do we start it, and what questions do we ask when we're diagnosing it? It's going to let you kind of diagnose your program and see where you're at. So Julio, why don't we get you to tune in here and tell us a couple things? Why don't you tell us how you kind of, if you're walking in blind to a sales program or company, what are some of the key things that you're looking for that helps kind of set up where to put sales automation or automation to increase productivity?
Yeah, I'm looking at a few things. I'm looking at any task that is not revenue specific. I'm looking at what tasks can be identified that could be automated without any loss of the human touch during the sales process, right? So obviously phone calls, we're not definitely not there yet, if ever. But a lot of other things, yes, right? So I'm looking for things that might take away from their time on revenue. I'm looking for things that are easily automated and that are not going to take away from the human touch or the high touch that is required at some points throughout the sales process. And I'm also looking at the firm's maturity level from a technology standpoint, because that's going to tell me how much or what level or what sophistication we could possibly work on. So I think those are three of the things I look for.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you look initially when you're walking into a company? How do you initially look at the sales process? Because from my experience, that's usually something that needs to be addressed right away. Because when I'm looking at a pipeline, I'll give you an example. I'll walk in and be like, hey, why do you have 20 deals in here that have been stagnant for 180 days or more? Like, why are they sitting there and there's no flow? So, how do you kind of approach the sales process side of that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely looking and doing a pipeline evaluation. One of the first things I usually do anytime I go into an account is really just look at the pipeline and start there, right? It all starts there and then sort of stems out. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like I want to look at what they're doing in there. I want to look for red flags, right? One of them being a overly abundant amount of time that somebody is sitting in the process somewhere, some way and try and figure out what that looks like, right? And ultimately, the goal is to figure out how to optimize every single step within the process. And what that usually means is there's automation involved, right? So every stage has to be examined, optimal time within each stage needs to be examined. And then only then can you actually think about like tuning up someone's pipeline to the point where you can say that, I've actually added velocity to the sale or I've sped up the sales process.
Yeah, and usually, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you and I both come across this where someone's like, "Oh, my sales process is dialed in and X, Y, Z," and we drill down, and they're doing okay. But then I say, "Okay, well, what are your gates and stages?" And they're like, "Gates? What do you mean?" Well, what data do you have to collect to move on to the next stage? Because we know, as well as every other salesperson, that even in the best pipeline, 95% of your leads don't go through to conversion, and they're going back into cycle for marketing. So when we're talking about gates, we're talking about information you're collecting for marketing to do more staged re-engagement, to bring people back to the marketing qualified lead places. And a lot of people aren't asking this question. They look at sales as a convention. Once they're out of the pipeline, I don't care. They're not thinking about sales actually starts when they say no the first time. That's when
Yeah.
sales start. I don't even think I'm in a sale until I've heard no 4 or 5 times, right? Or heard multitudes of objections. Like at that point, we're just in a friendly conversation until that point, right? Like what's the point of sales? If you guys are watching this, and throw up a little like or comment, and let us know what you think. I don't know if we're connected right to LinkedIn right now because we kind of messed that up this time, but we're getting better on that. I'm sure on the next one we'll be better. But let us know where you kind of get stuck, or if you look at marketing and sales as being interchangeable. And I think that's a good place to kind of go to productivity, and talk about this a little bit. Because when we're looking for productivity, there's a huge disconnect nowadays between sales and marketing. In a lot of companies, they're siloed, they don't talk to each other, revenue goals aren't the same. And we work primarily with HubSpot, which is a partner that allows you to understand that sales and marketing go together. They're called smarketing, right? That's what we live by. And Julia and I run smarketing meetings every week. So, Julia, what do you think from a productivity standpoint and allowing the process to flow smoothly? Do you think smarketing benefits? And then where do you think the biggest challenges are?
Yeah, it absolutely benefits. I just think like it's been such a, I don't know, century-long battle between sales and marketing. It's just like something that never has really sorted itself out. But I love the concept, and I think that the way we've done it, we've had success. And I've seen other folks have success, but it is a very difficult thing because, like it or not, I mean, marketing is always going to bring in leads, and always they're going to be cast aside by sales and said, hey, these are not good enough, get me some good leads, right? And there's just going to be that overarching everlasting battle that is going to exist. But that said, there's some really cool programs I've seen where marketing and sales work very well together, and then that's where demand generation comes in, and revenue operations as well, where they sort of bridge the gap between some of those departments that are siloed, and really make sure that they're working together. So I think it's a great idea. I think you got to think it through before you do it, because it's not easy. But when you get it, it really does work. So yeah, I think it's not a pie in the sky idea.
Yeah, like one of the things that we find the best is our salespeople work hand in hands with our marketers, because our marketers have really good grasp on the overall trends of markets, where salespeople have overall grasp of the feeling of customers at this certain stage in the process itself. So when I'm looking at the full cycle of what's happening, I'm always looking at the whole picture, the holistic view, which I believe that marketing is generally very good at. But then where sales is good at is, how do I move the psychology from a lead to a buyer? And that's really the difference. I believe that marketing is almost the institution, and then the salespeople are the psychologists that work within that institution. And so it's an interesting kind of subset between the two. And what we do, like Julio and I weekly, is we get our salespeople to work with our marketers to develop sequences. First off, for clarity for the marketers about what we need at each stage, and to get more in the psychology of the buyer at those stages. So our remarketing and our conversation tracks are better. But at the same time, we're getting our salespeople to understand, okay, a lead magnet coming from like this will have a buyer psychology that's different from our leads coming off these forms or this campaign over here. Because really, salespeople are in a bad habit, and this especially in the SaaS world, because people are not trained well, treating every lead the same. Every lead is not the same. That's like saying every person's the same. They have very different needs. And what a typical SaaS person will come on, and you've been through all these demos. Hey, Julio, is like, let me show you our product demo and blah, blah, blah. Like, really, why don't you walk me through? What are you trying to achieve with this? Like, how are you trying to go? And then you'll tell them, and then they totally miss it. And they go onto a product demo that's completely generic. And they don't adjust, they don't move. And you literally told them, like, they'll have the discovery questions because their people are smart enough to put them there, but then they're oblivious to like listening because they're nervous about
Yeah.
getting through a presentation. It's crazy. Like sales, traditional sales. So everyone from SaaS listening out there understands we had conversations, and it was like a back and forth. It was not like, here's just my product. No, it was like, can I trust this individual? Are they sharp as a tack? Are they going to add to my life? Do they have, do they have integrity? We're skipping all these things nowadays. I find that so many in the sales presentations, 90% of them, people aren't good salespeople. People are customer success people at best. And the best part of optimizing a sales process is teaching people within it what to say and when, but more than that, it's training them, right? And if you want to increase productivity, you have to train your people to actually do sales. And I find modern SaaS selling, this is my biggest thing. I'm pushing all you SaaS guys, I'm picking on you. This isn't manufacturing, this isn't distribution. Those people know how to sell. SaaS people, you're trained to be order takers, or you're trained to be standardization, and you're not very nimble. And being nimble is what closes larger accounts, enterprise accounts especially, right? And so I'm challenging all of you out there when we're thinking about improving our processes. Don't forget good old fashioned sales training, good old fashioned methodologies, good old fashioned relationship building. Like, hey, after you have a meeting with someone, add them on LinkedIn saying, it was great to meet you. Thanks for spending the time with me. I look forward to our next discussion. What does it take you? A minute to say thank you? Or what the old thing where you hand write a card to somebody, right? Or send over a little gift, whatever it is. Old fashioned stuff still works. And this is what we take out of modern sales processes. We forget that there is a way to build relationships and a way to sell, and they have to come together. And what we try to teach our clients is that they're not mutually exclusive, right? You can't just live in the old and you can't live in the new. So with our manufacturing clients, you, you can't just live in the old. Like, you need more than a pen and paper and a shake of a hand nowadays. Like, there's contracts and speed to things. And then with our SaaS, that there are relationships and taking time and remembering birthdays and understanding what your clients are looking for from connection and networking. So those are a few things that stand out to me, Julio. And I realize we might be recorded right now instead of posted to LinkedIn Live, so it might be a little bit different when people are listening to this. But as you guys have your questions, you're watching this, we'll watch the video uploads, whether you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube or X, and we'll be answering those questions. So, Julio, my big question: you do a lot of fractional management, and so he's working with customers, figuring out how to move the sales needle in a lot of different ways. What do you feel are the three biggest factors right now into moving productivity on a sales team? And you can
Yeah,
go
good
high level,
question.
matter.
Yeah. Yeah, it's man, it's very unique per situation for sure. But if I look at all of them together, like there's definitely like number one is process and efficiency, right? Like to kind of go hand in hand, right? If there's not a process in place that folks know about that have been trained on, it's generally a mess and it needs to be cleaned up, and there needs to be some sort of consistency built in. That's one of the first things that I see as sort of a little bit of a mess in most accounts that I've looked at, which is, yeah, not something that's easy to fix either when you don't have a process. It takes time, and it takes somebody who knows what they're doing to go in there and literally architect a process that is ideal for not only your sellers, but also matches the way that the buyers buy. Having that in place is key. Outside of that, I would say also like lack of a proper tech stack, right? Like not using a proper tech stack can cause a lot of problems. It's almost like using no tech stack at all. Sometimes it's even worse because you have all these different things happening that don't talk to each other, they don't connect, and they end up just being more work than they're used to, right? If there's no good integration between just one and two systems together, then you're kind of screwed because you're doing all this extra stuff. And imagine that at scale is trouble. So I look at the tech stack. I see that's generally a problem. And then, of course, with the process, that efficiency is a problem. And then I would also now point it to leadership, right? I mean, I would say like there's also like people are too busy, right? If they're a growing company or they don't have the right person in place or whatever that looks like, there's sometimes that issue as well. Luckily for me, most of the clients I have worked with lately are great leaders. They just needed to fill that gap. So there wasn't a major problem there. Sometimes if there's somebody in there who doesn't do the job right, it can cause a bigger problem than doing nothing at all. So those are the three big ones for me: leadership, process, and tech stack, I'd say.
That was perfect. And what I'd like to touch on and explore a little bit more is leadership, because one of the things I find, and this is kind of disingenuous, is people be like, oh, I treat my people like people unless they're in sales, unless they're in sales. And this is what I get wound up by. People hire people in sales, and in 3 months, they expect them to move the world. And they don't have the tools. They can't do it themselves. And they hire this salesperson who's not trained in process, who's not trained in everything else, but they got a great attitude and lots of energy, and they expect them to go move the world. And they're ill-equipped. It's like sending your soldier to battle and not giving them any of the equipment that they need to fight the war. Like, it's a wild thing that leadership does in smaller companies that has to be rearranged. If you're hiring a salesperson to save yourself or to push the needle without building the foundation first, you're not just going to hurt your productivity, you're going to hurt the culture of your company. Because just because you treat everybody else perfect in your company and you treat sales very badly and like a number, that ricochets off and other people see it. And I think that's one of the biggest things I see in organizations is you can't be all collaborative in every other part of your organization and then mastering commander with your salespeople. And how many calls I get on with organizations that tell me, well, I need this, I'm going to produce this number, this is going to work this way. And I go, okay, well, what's your collateral? What does this look like? How does this? Oh, we don't have any of that. All right. So why is a salesperson who can make the same amount of money going to come work for you as go over to this competitor over here who has all the infrastructure? They're not.
Yeah, not going to happen.
Not going to happen, right? So it's a competitive marketplace now. And this is what I think company owners think. My company's awesome. Everybody does. It's like my kid's the best. But I'm going to tell you, your kid's not. Your company's not. There's always better than you. And there's always another place to go. And that's what the free market is a great competition. It makes us all better. But that's where you got to confront yourself, is saying, how do I make a really equitable environment? How do I tie it to people's goals? How do I make them feel safe and secure? Psychological safety is probably the number one thing in the game nowadays on a good sales team. And then how do I make it an atmosphere of growth where they take ownership themselves? They go after those things, but you give them the level of support that they need versus the one you think is required. And I think that that's a hard balance to strike. And productivity at the end of the day in sales comes from people. And you can have the best process and things, and they're following, they will get results, but you'll never go parabolic. You'll never go to that next level without lining people up. And that's where I think people skip, is the whole point of automation is to make your salesperson happier, that they don't have to do something manually, and produce higher results so they get higher commissions and you make more revenue and you have more happy customers because the process was more simple to buy and gave them value in a shorter order. But too often we focus on one of those, just one, right? Where company owners are just revenue, revenue, got to get revenue, or they're pie in the sky, like, oh, I'm not going to sell my stuff. I'm working on the best product in the world, and I haven't sorted my go to market. We see those too. That's scary stuff. And then there's ones who are just salespeople, and they're feeling the pressure from that. They're driven by revenue, and there's like, you're only as good as your next month. And this is why I tell sales leaders, if you're judging your salespeople by a month and you forget the past year, 2 years of their performance, you'll turn them over. Like, they will leave you, because sales are done in quarters. It's January, February, March. Why? Because you're going to have lower sales in January. You're going to have a little bit more in February, and you're going to have a lot more in March. And we know this just in our own business. We know that October, November big, December small. We know this, and in most businesses it's the same, unless you're in retail and December is the be all end all of it, right? Please, as a manager, if you want productivity and you want humanity on your teams, which is going to be so important going into this AI world, think about quarters as your goals. Quarterly goals make sense, even annual goals as you're building towards, but quarters are good barometers, right? They're good barometers of performance, but don't be cutting people month to month or saying your results are out the door from last month, man. They don't mean anything, right? Like, imagine if you had a SDR, and this is a productivity thing. 1 month, they set an average of 20 meetings a week for you. Oh, I got 80 meetings that month. And the next month they do 10, and you're like, oh, but you're going to get fired. What about the 90 meetings they did in those 2 months? And if you divide that, you're like, you're on goal, you're on pace. So be a human about it, is what I'm saying. People will go up and down. And productivity, I believe, comes from the human perspective. And I was taught that by one of my mentors. Every time I sit down with him, first way he'd start every coaching session is, how are you? Tell me about your life. And sometimes, because I'm a little bit prima donna-ish, like every good salesperson, I'd spend the whole time talking about my life, and we never get to the business or the tactics, which were the other formations of the conversation. Remember that. Start with the person. And I just want to say, watch your productivity fly when people actually know you care about them. Right? That's a big one for me. So Julio, when you're going through your coaching sessions and you get personal with people, but you find that there's hiccups, right? How do you get them back to productivity? And so let me give you an example. I reframe it, right? So one of the tactics I use is reframing, saying, hey, you only booked 7 calls this week so far, but last week you booked 27, right? So you're not just today, and everything's going to go up and down. And I did a little reframing with a guy just the other day around this. And so what other tools do you use to kind of get people refocused on the productivity side?
Yeah, so one of the things is knowing what motivates them, right? Whether that's intrinsic stuff or extrinsic stuff, right? Intrinsic being, their own competitiveness or um, drive to win, and then external, of course, is cash or something else, right? And it's achieving a goal, it's buying a house, it's putting food on the table for the family, whatever that is. And I always like to understand my people and understand what drives them and what motivates them. And then when they're lacking in productivity, always just, as you say, reframe. I guess it would be a reframe in a sense, but like step back, look at things from a perspective of, are you in line to hit those goals that we talked about for the past 2 months or 3 months or a year? And no, I mean, not if you keep doing things this way, right? So let's bring it back together. Let's put a new plan of action in here, and let's forget about what happened last week and move forward in a better way. And I find that internal motivations, whether they be extrinsic or intrinsic, are so valuable to get people to do things, right? Whatever those things are. So if it's productivity, good chance that, if it's a lack of productivity, it's either problem with technology, perhaps, maybe. Lack of understanding their day too, which I've seen many times, salespeople not knowing how to structure their day and doing things off key, right? Maybe doing things backwards, maybe doing calls in the afternoon and, sitting around, doing whatever in the morning. And that's obviously an issue that has to be worked out from a productivity perspective. It could involve training. It could involve some type of technology that helps them schedule things. Or like I said, it could be just sitting down with them and talking about their goals and how they really need to focus if they want to achieve them. And I find that it's generally one of those elements that helps me get them back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just so much to go off of there. Like when I look at modern sales processes, one of the things that I focus on is how do I keep my people in a single window on my CRM, which for us is our task menu on HubSpot, and they can hit start because I know now programmatically I can put their daily method of operations and best way of going about things right into their tasking menus. So this should be a call, this should be an email, this should be a text, this should be a LinkedIn message, this should be this, and we're using sequencing based pairs to run people through. But this also allows salespeople not to have to do brain work in the middle of function work. And they're very separate. Like Julio and I, you know this, like when we spend a day and we're in strategy meeting after strategy meeting, we're so tired, right? You can only handle so much strategy and you're like zonked. Like I've even put buffers in my calendar. Somehow they don't get respected. I don't understand how, but I try to put 15 minutes in between meetings because my brain has to like re-go, right? It gets harder, especially as I get older here to do that. So what we're trying to do with task menu is put systematic thinking and function thinking separate. And when they're in function and in rhythm, they spend their day in that task menu. And that's where that sales automation really comes in. And a great system can support it and great AI can support it. Is function, right? Function, function, function. And if they can stay in that zone, you can get 6 good hours, 7 good hours of a salesperson in that one zone. And then they can do their strategic reach outs on LinkedIn or whatever else outside of that time, that prospecting mode stuff, because that takes a lot more brain work and individually adjusting. But if you keep them in with that automation and good intelligence, it's just one function window. And I find that that's the most massive increase to productivity because you can go from like 50 tasks a day to 200 tasks a day per salesperson if you schedule your programming right. And it's got great tracking, and you can see the trends and make adjustments as sales manager and have leading and lagging indicators and now be on point where you want to go. And hey, if you guys like that, throw some comments out, throw some likes. I know that this might be recorded, but that's okay. And you can ask us some questions about, what you're using. It might not be HubSpot, it might be Salesforce, it might be Keep, it might be Zoho, it might be a million different programs. But ask your questions about how you're functioning within it, how you're keeping your salespeople in a single window. Because as soon as they start strategizing, they start losing function. As soon as they start losing function, they lose fitness. As soon as they start losing fitness, you start losing business. And that is the key to everything, is how much revenue can you drive as the business owner. Revenue and profit margin and quality are the three things we think about, right? So Julia, with that being said, do you have any kind of closing comments you want to throw out there about automation and productivity that have stood top of mind for you? I know you've been using, maybe we end this with a little AI piece. And as I know, we got webinars coming up with very interesting people and stuff like that we're going to be releasing to you guys. But why don't you talk a little bit about how that's assisting you in your productivity?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different technologies or AIs that I'm using currently for productivity. Well, first of all, let me start with just a quick analogy, right? I remember like being a kid and hearing this story that was, okay, if you had to send out 500 envelopes, right? Mail, which way would be faster? If you sat there and just stuffed each envelope, folded the paper, stuffed each envelope, and then kept going? Or if you folded each paper, forgot about the envelopes, folded the papers up all together, and then later just put them one by one in the envelopes? Which one would be quicker? And the answer is, well, I mean, when you're doing the batch tasks, right? When you're doing the folding of the papers and then you go over and stuff them in envelopes, not doing a paper envelope. What that does is, as you mentioned, you're cross correlating two different like elements there that shouldn't be, versus batching your tasks. So I think that's a really big and an important point for productivity is like, don't jump around what you're doing. Make sure you block a time off and then focus on that. And then you get into what's called focus time. And that's where you start to see real productivity. But if you never have focus time and you're always, kind of surface level, then you're not going to be productive, right? So that's the first piece. And then the second piece, what technology am I using? Yeah, a ton of stuff, right? I mean, for example, I am using an email reply AI email replier, which allows me to quickly and easily like go through my inbox, and it generates a couple different replies that I can use per the message, which matches the tone. That's a good one. I'm using a variety of different like chat GPT bots. As well, which are trained in different things. So whether it is like sales methodologies and strategies, or marketing, etc. So that way, when I'm doing those types of tasks that require, I don't know, I would say a lot of time, this saves me a ton, right? I think anybody knows that ChatGPT can save you tons of time when it comes to content. However, you got to put some human touch on it too. Just to put that out there, do not just keep pushing out chat GPT stuff. I can see it a mile away with those emojis, and it's not cool. It's not human, and you're not going to see much engagement on it. And I think soon they'll be looking into that very, very heavily, right? And then on the sales side, right? I mean, we have automated lead scoring, right? We have things that are happening and telling us what those leads are doing, and essentially whether they're hitting a threshold there, which we think that would set them at a place where we should reach out and buy. And then, looking at a lot of other things too, right? A lot of other things that'll help the sales process as well, and help productivity and just take away the time. And I think you and I talked about this like a couple weeks ago when we talked about sales managers and them being maybe at risk, or at least certain kinds of them, because of AI. And I think, yeah, that still holds true a couple weeks later. And it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, exciting times. As we were talking about AI and the rodeo that is, but sales automation, just remember, it's just to enable your people to go faster, and at the same time provide a higher quality experience from a buying experience to the customer, and give you good quality data as a manager. And if you can get those three things lined up, your sales force goes faster. And everything else is a lot of conjecture and nonsense. It's really easy to do if you have HubSpot, if you have Salesforce, if you one of these modern CRMs, you can do a lot. You can, it's right at your fingertips, and it just takes time to program and do, and you need some know-how. But you're steps away from building a multi-million dollar business, and increase in your multi-million dollar business, if you're listening and you're already there, that you've never seen before, by adding these simplistic things that have all these smart people have spent countless hours building in to make available to you, right? And sometimes it's like, I imagine like walking into an armory as a person, and we if you've ever been in Men in Black, the little pea shooter or whatever, they grab, instead of like grabbing the spaceship off the wall or whatever's there. And that's what people are doing nowadays. They have this like arsenal in front of them, and they're not using anything. They're using the smallest thing available. So at the end of the day, we appreciate all of you tuning in. We're going to be doing this series, hopefully get to a weekly trend soon. We're going to bi-weekly for the time being. And now we're going to start bringing on some CEOs and things to talk about things. And we're building to a really, really big webinar type and topic that we're going towards in May. And we're going to be bringing over some big selling people that have been in industry for 40, 50 years selling, because these people have the knowledge of traditional sales, which make a big difference. And then we're going to bring on some of the fanciest AI people you've ever met, and some of our partners that we work with. So you guys get an inlay of how they think and how they think the market's moving. And everyone's in a little bit of contention, right? They all have their different views on things. And we're going to explore those, and I'll try to poke as many holes in them as I can with Julio here, and make them feel very uncomfortable, because that's our job, is to get like, why do you think what you think out in these conversations? So expect those coming next. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you.